I was the family outcast until my parents decided my success was something everyone deserved to share. Hi everyone. I guess I just need to get this off my chest because it's been eating away at me for too long. My name's Evelyn, but those who genuinely care about me call me Evie. For as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of my family. I know it sounds dramatic, but honestly, there's no other way to describe it. Growing up in Pennsylvania, I always felt like I didn't quite fit in. My mom, Linda, is the epitome of a matriarch, controlling, judgmental, and somehow always right, even when she's not. My dad, Roger, wasn't much better. He was so passive that he might as well have been invisible, always backing up whatever my mom said, no matter how little sense it made. Then there were my siblings, Mark and Jessica. Mark, the golden boy, could do no wrong. Jessica, the baby of the family, got away with anything, and my parents would just laugh it off. Me, I was the troublemaker. I was the one who asked too many questions, dreamed too big, and was apparently too independent for my own good. It felt like my family's favorite hobby was pointing out everything I did wrong, from the way I dressed to the friends I chose. But what hurt the most was how normal it all seemed, like I had been cast as the villain in a play I never signed up for. There's one memory that still stings. I was 13 and had spent weeks painting a mural on my bedroom wall, a blend of stars and abstract patterns that felt like a piece of my soul brought to life. When my mom saw it, she said, "Well, I guess we'll have to repaint this mess once you outgrow your little artist phase." Mark laughed, and Jessica asked why I didn't just buy posters like a normal kid. I wanted to cry, but instead managed to say, "It's not a phase." My mom just shrugged and walked away, as if I wasn't even worth arguing with. High school was even worse. Mark was the star quarterback, Jessica was a cheerleader, and I was the artsy kid in the art club who worked part-time at a diner. My parents attended every single one of Mark's games, threw him parties, and bragged about him to the neighbors. Jessica got a brand new car for her 16th birthday, even though I had been saving for years to buy my own. Meanwhile, I was lucky if they even remembered to ask me how my day had been. By the time I graduated, I knew I had to leave. Their indifference had turned into open hostility when I told them I wasn't going to college right away. I wanted to move to the city and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. To them, it was just another example of me wasting my potential. "You'll come crawling back," my mom said the night before I left, "and don't expect us to bail you out when you do." I didn't look back. Moving to Philadelphia was terrifying, but for the first time, I felt free. I slept on friends' couches, took on random jobs, and eventually found some stability working as a waitress at a small, run-down diner. That's where I met Rachel. She was this loud, unapologetically funny bartender who could make anyone laugh. Rachel became my first real friend, the kind who saw me for who I was and liked me anyway. For years, my family was just a distant memory. I'd call them on holidays out of a sense of duty, and the conversations were always brief and superficial. If they missed me, they didn't show it. But I didn't mind. I was building a life for myself, even if it wasn't glamorous. By my late 20s, things began to change. I stumbled into event planning thanks to a gig I got through one of Rachel's friends. I threw myself into it. Long nights, tight budgets, and enough caffeine to make my heart race. Eventually, I teamed up with Nathan, who was a logistical genius, and the perfect counterbalance to my creative chaos. Together, we built a business that not only survived, but thrived. We started small, organizing birthday parties and local charity galas. Word spread quickly, and within a few years, we were planning high-profile weddings and corporate events for big-name clients. The money was better than I'd ever dreamed. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about rent or cutting corners on groceries. But that's when my family suddenly remembered I existed. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Jessica started texting me more often, asking about my business, and complimenting my Instagram posts. Mark, who hadn't called me in years, rang me up to catch up. Most of the call was him bragging about his job as a regional manager, but he managed to slip in a few questions about how much money I was making. Then there was my mom. She started leaving voicemails about how proud she was of my success and how much she wished I would visit more often. Hearing her voice dripping with fake sweetness after years of cold indifference was surreal. I didn't trust it. Why would I? These were the same people who laughed at me, dismissed me, and practically pushed me out of the family. Still, a tiny part of me, the naive, hopeful part, wanted to believe they had changed. Against my better judgment, I let them back in a little. I agreed to meet Jessica for lunch when she happened to be in Philly. She gushed about how proud she was of me and how she always knew I'd do something amazing. It felt good, even though it sounded hollow. But then she started complaining about how expensive her rent was and how she and her boyfriend were trying to save for a condo. She didn't outright ask for help, but the implication was clear. I brushed it off, telling her I wasn't in a position to help. Her smile faded, and the conversation quickly turned awkward. The pattern continued. My mom called one evening to tell me how proud she was of my achievements before segueing into a rant about my dad's mounting medical bills. Mark sent me a Facebook message out of the blue, wanting to discuss business opportunities. Even my dad, who barely ever spoke to me, called to suggest I buy a vacation home that the family could use. It was exhausting. I began dodging their calls, replying to texts with vague answers, and shutting down any discussions that hinted at money. But they were relentless. Every interaction felt like a game, a carefully orchestrated attempt to extract something from me without making it too obvious. I wasn't naive. I saw right through their tactics. Still, a nagging guilt crept in, whispering that maybe I owed them something. The breaking point came on my mom's birthday. I'd been guilted into making the trip back home for her party. Nathan told me I didn't have to go and encouraged me to set boundaries, but I felt obligated. So there I was, back in a house that had never felt like home, surrounded by people who only seemed to notice me now that I was successful. The evening started out tolerably, awkward but manageable. My mom thrived in her role as the doting mother in front of her friends, while Mark and Jess acted as though we'd always been a close-knit family. But as the night wore on and the wine flowed, the facade began to crack. It was Mark who brought it up during dinner. "You know, Evie," he began, "with all your success, it's only fair that you contribute a little to the family. Mom and Dad have done so much for us. It's time we gave back." I froze, my fork hovering mid-air. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Jess chimed in, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "He's just saying that with how much you're making, it wouldn't hurt to pitch in. Maybe help cover Dad's medical bills or pay for Mom to remodel the kitchen." I stared at them in disbelief. "I've worked my butt off to get where I am, and now you're telling me it's my responsibility to support everyone? Where was this concern when I was struggling to pay rent or afford food?" My mom cut in, her voice sharp. "Evelyn, don't be selfish. Family is supposed to support each other. Mark and Jess have done their part. Now it's your turn to step up." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Done their part?" I shot back. "Are you serious? Mark got his entire college education paid for, and Jess is living off her boyfriend's money. Meanwhile, I had to scrape and claw my way up from nothing because none of you cared enough to help me." The room went silent. My dad stared at his plate, avoiding my gaze. My mom's face flushed with anger, and Mark and Jess looked like they'd just been called out in class. Finally, my mom broke the silence. I don't know what's happened to you, Evelyn. You used to be such a sweet girl. Success has made you cold. I let out a bitter laugh. No, Mom, you made me cold. With that, I grabbed my coat, walked out the door, and drove back to Philadelphia with my hands trembling the entire way. That night, I made a decision. I was done. Done with their guilt trips, manipulations, and toxic entitlement. If they wanted money, they'd have to find someone else to exploit. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. After that disastrous birthday party, I resolved to cut ties with my family completely. I blocked their numbers, ignored their emails, and stopped checking messages on social media. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Rachel, as always, cheered me on. "They've been draining your energy for years, Evie," she said one night over drinks. "It's about time you set some boundaries." And for a while, it worked. I threw myself into my work, partnering with Nathan to secure even bigger clients. Our business was growing faster than I ever thought possible. I could finally afford the kind of luxuries I'd only dreamed of before. A new apartment in Rittenhouse Square, a car that didn't feel like it would fall apart on the highway, and even a few spontaneous trips to clear my head. Life was good until the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope with my parents' address written on the front. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from my mom, dripping with guilt and manipulation. "Evelyn, I don't know why you've shut us out, but I can only assume it's because of the misunderstanding at my birthday party. You need to understand that we only want what's best for the family, including you. We've always supported you in our own way, and it's hurtful that you don't see that. Your father and I are getting older, and things have been financially challenging. I hate to ask, but we could really use some help to keep the house. Please call me so we can talk this through like adults. Love, Mom." I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. Like adults? I thought bitterly. That was rich, coming from the woman who'd spent most of my life treating me like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't falling for it. But the letters kept coming, and the guilt started to eat away at me. What if they really were in trouble? What if my dad's health was worse than I thought? Rachel urged me to burn the letters, and Nathan told me to stay focused. But I couldn't shake the doubts. Then came the bombshell. It was a Saturday morning, and I was at my favorite cafe when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Normally, I'd have ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message read, "Evie, it's Jess. We need to talk. It's important." I stared at the screen, debating whether to delete the message or reply. Against my better judgment, I texted back, "What do you want?" Her response came quickly. "Meet me at the diner on 5th at noon. It's about Mom and Dad." I showed the message to Rachel, who frowned immediately. "Don't go," she warned. "You know it's a trap." "I know," I replied. "But if I don't, it's just going to linger in my mind." So I went. Jess was already there when I arrived, sipping a latte and looking annoyingly polished. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Evie," she said, standing up to hug me. I didn't return the gesture. "What do you want, Jess?" I asked as I sat across from her. She sighed, her expression a mix of regret and what might have been a performance. "Look, I know things have been strained between you and the family, but this is serious. Mom and Dad are in deep financial trouble. They're behind on the mortgage, and if they don't get help soon, they could lose the house." I crossed my arms. "And what does that have to do with me?" Jess gave me a pleading look. "You're the only one who can help them, Evie. Mark has his own family to take care of, and I'm still trying to get on my feet. But you're doing so well. You could save the house and barely feel it." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're unbelievable, Jess. Do you even hear yourself? After everything, you expect me to swoop in and save the day? Her expression hardened. "This isn't about the past, Evie. It's about family. Or do you not care about that anymore?" That hit a nerve, and she knew it. I stood up, shaking with anger. "Family? Don't you dare lecture me about family. I spent my entire life being your scapegoat, and now that I've finally built something for myself, you think you're entitled to it? Forget it, Jess. I'm done." I walked out before she could respond. Before she could get another word in, I walked out, shaken by the encounter. I knew they wouldn't back down, but I wasn't ready for just how far they would go. A week later, my lawyer, Victoria, called. "Evie, we need to talk," she said, her tone grave. "I've received a notice from your parents' attorney. They're suing you." My stomach dropped. "Suing me? For what?" She hesitated. "They're claiming you owe them financial support under the doctrine of filial responsibility. It's a stretch, but they're arguing that since you're financially secure and they aren't, you have a legal obligation to help them." Victoria explained that some states have filial responsibility laws that require adult children to financially support their parents if the parents are struggling and the child has the means to help. However, such laws are rarely enforced unless the parents can prove their financial troubles stem from unavoidable circumstances. Given my parents' history of reckless spending, Victoria was optimistic that we could argue their situation was self-inflicted. "This is insane. They can't just do that," I said, disbelief coursing through me. "They can try," Victoria replied, her tone firm. "But don't worry, we'll fight this. Just be prepared. This could get ugly." Ugly didn't even begin to describe it. Over the following weeks, I learned just how low my family was willing to stoop. They painted me as a selfish daughter who had abandoned her aging parents when they needed me most. Jess and Mark submitted affidavits detailing fabricated stories of how I'd supposedly exploited the family over the years. The lies were outrageous, but they didn't care. They wanted to break me. For a moment, it almost worked. But Rachel reminded me of something I'd fought for my entire life: myself. I wasn't about to let them win. So, I pushed back. As we dug deeper into the case, I uncovered a secret my family had been hiding. A secret they never wanted me to know. The lawsuit turned my life upside down. I was furious, humiliated, and, if I'm honest, scared. It felt surreal that my own family would go so far as to drag me to court, to drain me financially. Thankfully, Victoria was a lifesaver during this nightmare. She was sharp, strategic, and completely unfazed. Once I got over the initial shock, she sat me down and said, "Evie, you have the resources and the evidence to fight this. But if they're willing to go this far, we need to be ready for anything." Anything turned out to be worse than I imagined. As the court date approached, Jess and Mark ramped up their smear campaign. On Facebook, they accused me of abandoning my parents, conveniently omitting the years they spent tearing me down. Mark's post went viral in our hometown, and neighbors chimed in, expressing their disappointment in me. Jess even gave an interview to a local paper, portraying me as a cold, work-obsessed woman who had forgotten her roots. The real blow came when Victoria began investigating my parents' finances. To prove they weren't as destitute as they claimed, we needed hard evidence. What she uncovered made my blood boil. My parents weren't just in financial trouble. They were drowning in debt because of years of irresponsible spending. Credit card statements revealed extravagant purchases, luxury vacations, designer clothes, and even a brand-new SUV for Jess. Even worse, my parents had taken out a second mortgage on the house they claimed was about to be foreclosed. Part of the money went to fund a failed business venture for Mark, and the rest supported Jessica's lavish lifestyle. During a pre-trial hearing, Victoria presented this evidence. It was clear the judge wasn't buying my family's sob story, but instead of backing off, they doubled down. Mark and Jess began spreading rumors in my industry, claiming I had built my business through unethical practices and exploited my workers. One client even canceled an event, citing concerns about my reputation. It was a gut punch, but Nathan and Rachel rallied around me. Nathan went into full damage control, contacting clients to reassure them of our integrity. Rachel, always bold, suggested we throw a tell-all party to expose my family's lies. I almost considered it. The turning point came when Victoria found something that completely shifted the case. One afternoon, she called me to her office, brimming with energy. "Evie, you're not going to believe this," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, emails, bank statements, and even a recorded phone call. Years ago, when I first started my business, my dad had offered to help me manage the paperwork. I had naively opened a joint account and given him access, assuming it had been closed when Nathan and I set up dedicated business accounts. But Victoria explained that the account was still active. While technically shared, using it for personal expenses without my knowledge could qualify as fraud. "They've been planning this for months," Victoria said. "Your parents, Mark and Jess, have been plotting to sue you since they found out how much your business is worth." My hands shook as I stared at the folder. "Are you serious?" I asked. She nodded. "They've been monitoring you, gathering anything they could use as leverage. But here's the kicker. They explicitly discussed using the lawsuit to pressure you into settling." She played the recording, and I heard my mother's voice, cold and calculating. "Evelyn won't want the publicity. She'll settle to make it go away. We just have to push hard enough." Victoria explained that malicious intent was a critical factor in dismissing cases. She laid out how the recordings, combined with financial evidence, would prove the lawsuit was filed in bad faith. "Judges don't tolerate people abusing the legal system," she said. "This evidence shows they're not seeking genuine support. They're trying to extort money." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. This wasn't just about money. It was a deliberate attack, orchestrated by my own family. They had turned me into their enemy the moment I became successful. Victoria filed a motion to dismiss the case on the grounds of malicious intent. But before the hearing, I decided to confront my family one last time. I arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a lawyer's office downtown. When they arrived, Jess looked smug, Mark seemed irritated, and my parents avoided eye contact. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady but ice-cold. "The second mortgage, the spending, the plan to use this lawsuit to squeeze money out of me. I have the proof, and so does the court." My mother stiffened. "We were just trying to save," I snapped. "You've spent my whole life tearing me down, and now that I've built something for myself, you think you can take it? You're delusional." Mark rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Evie. You've got more money than you know what to do with. Helping out your family isn't going to kill you." "Helping?" I repeated, my laugh sharp and bitter. "You mean funding your lifestyle while you drag my name through the dirt? Absolutely not." Jess tried to look hurt, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "We're your family, Evie. Don't you care about us?" "No," I said, rising to my feet. "I care about people who care about me, and that's not you." I walked out, leaving them to sit in their defeat. A week later, the judge dismissed their case, citing clear evidence of bad faith. But the damage was already done. My relationship with my family was irreparably shattered. Not that there had been much left to salvage. In the aftermath, I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief. I had won, but at a significant emotional cost. It was painful to accept that my own family had betrayed me so deeply. Rachel summed it up best. "Blood doesn't make family, Evie. Love does." She was right. It was time to stop chasing the love I'd never get from my parents and siblings, and instead cherish the people who truly supported me. Just when I thought I could finally move on, another secret came to light. A betrayal so calculated and cruel that it made everything else seem trivial in comparison. After the lawsuit was dismissed, I was ready to close the chapter on my toxic family and move forward. I was exhausted, but determined to focus on my growing business and the people who truly cared about me. But then, Victoria called with news that shook me to my core. "Evie," she said, her tone grave, "I've been reviewing additional financial documents tied to your parents. You'll want to sit down for this." I braced myself, expecting to hear about more debt or reckless spending. What I wasn't prepared for was this. My parents had been secretly siphoning money from me for years. When I first started my business, I had opened a small joint savings account with my dad to manage startup expenses. At the time, it seemed practical. He had offered to help with the paperwork, and I was too trusting to question it. Once the business took off, I forgot about the account, assuming it had been closed. But my dad hadn't forgotten. He'd kept the account active, and over the years, both he and my mom had quietly withdrawn money whenever they wanted. The total, over $100,000. I sat in stunned silence as Victoria explained the series of transactions she had uncovered. They had used the money for vacations, home renovations, and even part of Mark's college tuition. Every detail was meticulously documented. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I had worked tirelessly to build something from nothing, and all the while, they had been stealing from me. The worst part? They didn't even need it. This wasn't about survival. It was pure greed. Fueled by equal parts rage and heartbreak, I decided I wouldn't let them get away with it. I filed a police report and pressed charges for fraud and theft. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew it would make me the pariah of my already fractured family. But at this point, I had nothing left to lose. The fallout was swift and brutal. My parents were served with legal papers, and the news spread quickly through our hometown. Mark and Jess were furious, accusing me of tearing the family apart and calling me every name imaginable. Predictably, my parents played the victims, claiming they had only taken the money to help the family and had always intended to pay it back. But the evidence was undeniable. The case didn't take long to settle. My parents were ordered to repay every cent they had stolen, plus interest, though I doubted they ever would. The judge also imposed a hefty fine for their actions, leaving them in even worse financial trouble. For me, it was never about the money. It was about justice. For the first time, I felt like I had stood up for myself and won. In the months that followed, I severed all ties with my family. I changed my phone number, locked down my social media, and moved into a new apartment with enhanced security. Rachel and Nathan became my lifelines, supporting me through the emotional fallout and reminding me I wasn't alone. Victoria, too, became more than just my lawyer. She became a trusted friend, someone who had my back when it mattered most. But the story didn't end there. Just when I thought I had weathered the worst, I received an anonymous tip. An envelope was slipped under my office door. Inside were documents revealing a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. My parents had forged my name on the mortgage for their house. I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. They had dragged me into their financial mess even deeper than I'd realized. The mortgage was in default, and technically, I was responsible for it. This had been their plan all along. If they couldn't guilt me into giving them money outright, they would exploit my name and credit to save themselves. I handed everything over to Victoria, who immediately launched an investigation. She confirmed that my parents had used old copies of my signature from business documents to forge my name on the mortgage application. Handwriting analysis proved I hadn't signed the paperwork, and bank records showed the payments were being withdrawn from their accounts, not mine. Victoria assured me we had an airtight case for fraud. The legal battle dragged on for months, but in the end, I cleared my name and was removed from the mortgage. The ordeal left me completely drained. By the time it was over, I was done. Completely and utterly done. I had given my family every opportunity to redeem themselves, and they had only used it to hurt me further. I realized then that while I couldn't change them, I could take away their power over me. I cut them out of my life for good and found peace in my chosen family, the people who had stood by me through everything. Rachel and I took a much-needed trip to Maui, spending our days sipping cocktails on the beach and reminiscing about how far we'd come from our diner days. Nathan and I continued to grow our business, expanding into new cities and cementing our reputation as one of the best event planning firms in the region. And Victoria? She remained my go-to for legal and personal matters, a constant reminder that not everyone in the world is out to take advantage of you. As for my parents, Mark and Jess, they faded into the background of my life, reduced to distant memories and cautionary tales. Last I heard, they had sold the house and moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Mark's marriage was crumbling, and Jess was still chasing dreams she'd never catch. I felt no pity, only relief that I was finally free. Looking back, I see now that being the black sheep wasn't a curse, it was a gift. It forced me to forge my own path, to find strength and resilience I didn't know I had. The journey wasn't easy, but it led me to a life I'm proud of. A life I built on my own terms, surrounded by people who truly care about me. Blood doesn't make a family. Love, trust, and loyalty do. And I finally found mine.